brutal, deadly attack on the Smith family was discovered on July 30th, 2015 in Pensacola, Florida. 3 family members, Voncile, Richard, and John, were found beaten and bloodied and found under piles of clothes in the home. A police press conference was held with the shocking idea that this was the work of witchcraft. And what scared the community even more was that the killer was still at large, possibly looking for the next attack. When the media got their hands on the story, they got creative with their headlines, calling it the Blue Moon Murders or Wiccan Sacrifice. This episode is called Dark Intentions, The Smith Family, and I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And this is Crime Salad. On the 30th of July in 2015, Richard Smith hadn't shown up for work for 2 days, so his supervisor made a trip over to his house to find his car still in the driveway. No one was answering the door. The doors and windows were locked. The windows were drawn, but nothing seemed disturbed. It was so out of character for Richard not to contact anyone or to not show up for work. He was in usual contact with a coworker, and that had suddenly stopped. And so, Richard's supervisor called 911 on Friday morning. When the police arrive, the house is quiet. The outside appearance is starkly different. There's no answer at the front door, and so they break in through the back door to enter the house. The room has a strange odor, and it's heavily cluttered with items, clothes, and unopened packages.
Kind of looked like something out of, like, Hoarders, the TV show.
Some described it as that. Now, as they look through the house, examining the quietness, they discover a body that is under a pile of clothes once they see feet peeking out, which had to have been startling. Another body was found under another pile of clothes, and so the officers immediately called in crime personnel and requested a homicide investigation to be done. Richard Smith, John Smith, and their mother, Voncile, lived a quiet life in their modest home. The neighbors noted that the family was not very social, often keeping to themselves and rarely interacting with others. They might have waved when going to the mailbox to pick up their mail, but for the most part, they just kept to themselves. Richard, often referred to as RT, his middle name was Thomas, was the man of the house. His family described him as being very loyal and highly intelligent while working for the Department of Homeland Security. Richard never married or had children, dedicating his life to his work and his family. Richard was 49 years old at the time of his death. John, the youngest son, had a learning disability since birth. Despite this, he was known for his friendly demeanor and had worked as a cart pusher at Walmart for years. Family members described John as happy and resembling a giant teddy bear due to his kind nature. He spent a lot of time at home, sitting with his mom, Voncile, and watching TV. John was 47 years old at the time of his death. Voncile, who often went by the name Bonnie, their mother, was usually home alone during the day until her sons returned from work. She was the central figure in the household, and her presence was a constant in the otherwise quiet house. Voncile spent a lot of her time in the living room, sitting in her recliner and ordering off QVC. She was always getting something delivered to the house. It was described that she was almost getting new packages every day. Voncile was 78 years old at the time of her death, and around this time, Voncile wasn't in very good health. She had actually fallen recently, so it was important to keep a close watch on her. Her son Richard had even put up D-Link cameras because of her recent fall.
When you're looking at the 3 of them, who would attack them? Like, they seem so innocent.
Yeah, they're a family. They keep to themselves.
Right.
Who could have murdered this family in their own home?
Exactly.
So here's what was found when looking a bit closer at the crime scene and gathering the evidence. So John's body was discovered in the living room. His body was slumped over the sofa, and it's believed that he was attacked shortly after eating dinner while sitting on the love seat, where he usually sat to watch TV. He was beaten in the head with a hammer. The indents to his skull showed those signs, along with the blood spatter on the wall behind him, which contained his blood and even pieces of his hair, and his throat had been slit, ultimately killing him. He was then covered with clothes that were piled on top of him. Now, Richard, he was discovered on the floor near John's feet, covered in a pile of clothes, still dressed for work, giving the impression that he was attacked the moment he got home from work. A plate of food that was left for him in the oven was untouched. It's believed that the killer waited until he got home from work, shot him in the right ear, which wasn't fatal, but just enough to startle him. And he was murdered in the same way as his brother, with his throat slit and his head beaten with a hammer.
Jeez.
It was believed by investigators that he was first shot in hopes that that shot would kill him, although professionals believe it was just enough to startle him to make the attack with the hammer easier. Richard was a very big guy. He was described as being over 300 pounds, so this was an interesting piece of the crime scene for the investigators.
So Richard was the guy who worked at Homeland Security, though,
yes.
Correct? Okay.
Now, as we mentioned, Voncile, she spent a lot of her time in the living room sitting on the recliner. The recliner was covered in blood, so it gave the investigators the belief that she was attacked there, possibly with a hammer, when she was just sitting there, least expecting it, but was dragged down the hallway in a rug that was originally being used on the floor. And blood evidence shows this. The recliner was covered in blood, and there was also bloody drag marks on the floor. Voncile was soon found in a back bedroom that was later learned to be John's room, and the rug was then wrapped around her, and she was covered in a very high pile of things like clothes and blankets. I think investigators said there was close to 17 bags of clothes that were piled on top of her.
It makes you wonder why whoever did this separated them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just like her sons, she showed multiple hits to the head with a hammer. Her throat was slit. But what was a little different is she had the top section of her pinky cut off. Now, at first, she wasn't immediately found. It actually took some piecing together to realize the suspicious pile of clothes in this room. Most likely there was someone underneath it. Isn't that just so horrific?
It is. And like we kind of mentioned before, this didn't seem like the type of family that would really have any enemies. But one thing that I'm kind of thinking about is that Richard worked in Homeland Security, and it does seem like maybe he got home. I don't know, maybe did someone follow him in? Was this something related to work? The fact that the pinky was cut off, like that's so...
Yeah. Well, this was actually a theory for sure. So the investigators, they got in touch with Richard's work, and Homeland Security dispatched 2 special investigators to search through Richard's computer and his belongings. And they must have conducted a thorough search because they spent hours sifting through his work-related items, particularly his computer. And they concluded that whatever he was working on did not cause his death. So that was ruled out.
Okay. I mean, because cutting off a pinky, that's like some mafia style stuff.
Yeah, that is.
It's kind of weird. Not to mention that the whole house was locked up. Mm-hmm. So whoever did this was able to get in and lock the doors before leaving.
Clearly, this is a hateful, angry, and vicious attack that was done to this family. Maybe it would have been a little different if Richard wasn't beaten also, or he didn't have a pile of clothes on top of him.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, because they all 3 were attacked with a hammer, right? Mm-hmm. So this wasn't something like a murder-suicide or like a family fight, something like that, because that's kind of what I was expecting. Mm-hmm. This is something where they were all 3 were victims. This wasn't something they could have inflicted on each other.
Yeah. So where did the investigators look next? They ruled out the job possibility. They eventually speak with the neighbors, and no one immediately saw anything unusual. They described the family as being more to themselves, and they knew that Voncile and her 2 adult sons lived there, and they just went to work and they would come home. Occasionally, they might wave while they're picking up the mail from the mailbox, but for the most part, they were pretty private. Now, a neighbor brought up to the police that there was another son of Voncile's that lived separately from the family. So he didn't live with them. He was actually the oldest of her sons, named Donald Hartung. A neighbor contacted him to tell him about his family. He arrived at the house in his old town car. It was hot outside, and he wasn't able to go into the house because of the investigation. But the officer there invited him into the back of his police car because he had AC. Donald brought along with him his dog, which was a boxer. He kept him in the car with the windows down, parked it in the shade, and Donald sat in the police car. An officer briefly chatted with him and reported that he seemed nervous and a little shook up.
Right, but how should you seem after your family just got murdered? It's kind of a tough one.
Yeah. So, a little about Donald Hartung. Donald was Voncile's firstborn. His father abandoned them both shortly after his birth, and Voncile met someone else 8 years later, giving birth to two sons, Richard and John.
Okay, so just to clarify, half-brothers, something like that, right?
Yes.
And then at the time of the murder, he lived completely separate from them. Okay.
Correct. He actually lived about 3 miles away from his mother's house, so pretty close. He was renting out a small 2-bedroom home, and he was 58 years old when his family was attacked. Now, this wasn't always the case. He actually was living in Virginia about 10 years before this all happened. He was married, and together they had a son. And when he and his wife divorced, he moved to Pensacola, Florida to be closer with his mother. So he and his wife separated, and the son stayed with his mother. Every Tuesday, he would make plans to go over to his mother's house and cook dinner. He would bring his boxer with him and let him run around the yard, being that it was fenced in. The police interviewed Donald, and the detective, they were pretty certain that he had something to do with this. Although Donald stayed open and he seemed honest, he agreed for them to take a DNA swab and allowed a search of his belongings. No questions asked. At the same time, in his recorded interview with the police, he never had a moment of showing emotion at all. He just held his composure and stuck to his story. He had no clue who could have done this, and he didn't do it. And at this time, the police were a bit skeptical. Donald was the last person to see them alive. Donald explained that it was a Tuesday, so they did what they do every Tuesday. He comes over and he cooks a meal. He puts together fried chicken, corn, green beans, fries, and biscuits. He prepares a plate for Richard because he always gets home late from work, and he puts that in the oven and leaves around 5 or 6 p.m. There were a few things that stood out. Once they investigated a bit more on this crime scene and the family dynamics by speaking to those who knew this family, things started to fall into place. Not to mention the crime scene held even more clues that this could have been a more personal attack. A hammer was found next to the kitchen sink. It didn't appear to have any blood on it, but it was believed to be the murder weapon, and it was sent in for testing. Inside the garbage, there are scraps of the food from the dinner that Donald made. And on top of that, there were bloodied rags that were thrown in there, 2 of Voncile's purses and her wallet, as well as cigarettes that were seemingly placed right on top of all of that.
Which makes you wonder why all the evidence was just thrown in the trash and left there. It's very sloppy. Like, he took the time to clean the expected murder weapon, but then he kind of just threw, like, bloody rags and cigarettes and everything else just in the trash. Like, that's something you would think that you would take with you and dispose of. You wouldn't leave it at the crime scene.
Maybe you just thought, throw it in the garbage bag and just goes into the deep, dark abyss.
Yeah.
It's just gone. Yeah, there was a lot left behind. You know, the hammer, the cigarette butts, those were all sent in for testing. So while they were waiting for the test results to come back, investigators pieced together more pieces to the puzzle and ruled things out that could be a possibility. So investigators, they do a search on Donald's personal belongings at his house, which we said was about 3 miles away from where his family was murdered. It was a very basic home with little furniture and a few belongings. Obviously, he was living there alone. It basically painted the picture that he didn't have much. While living in Pensacola, Florida, he worked as a security guard at a local hospital for $10 an hour. When the investigators looked through his home, they noticed a worship room. There was a prayer circle and a collection of witchcraft books, tarot cards, ritual knives, candles, a Ouija board, and strange artifacts. It was unusual. It came off as creepy. The investigators got an eerie vibe from the home. So Donald would tell the police that he was a Wiccan. Now, to clarify, Wiccans do not typically believe in human sacrifice. Rather, they believe in not causing harm to others.
It almost seems to me like they jumped the gun on this whole Wiccan sacrifice type stuff to come out in a press conference and actually say it. Because, I mean, that's your community. Like, I'm sure it put everyone into a panic. And given what we know about the crime scene and what they walked into, it didn't really raise red flags and scream sacrifice or witchcraft. You know, it was kind of just like an attack with some hammers and there was a gunshot, that type of stuff.
Yeah. And it really did make the community go basically into a panic, thinking that there was this crazy serial killer on the loose who was murdering people in their home, covering them with piles of clothes. Now, after quite some time, it was mentioned that this was all a tactic that the police used to divert attention away from the case.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It seems like they just said too much too early.
Yeah, because they soon found a motive behind all of this, and it's a pretty simple motive. Donald, he took it upon himself in August, which was a month after his family was murdered, to clean out the house, and he sold everything in the house, including the house itself. He was eager to dispose of everything. People in the extended family, like Voncile's niece, were concerned that he was simply selling everything. It was kind of too soon, and they became suspicious of his actions. While his family was at his house, he pulled out a machete and asked, "If I did it, why do I still have this, and why am I not in jail?"
It's a little creepy.
So the family also brought up some interesting insider information, specifically one instance which Donald held a grudge. Donald, who was married and lived in Virginia at the time, would visit Pensacola with his son and his wife. Donald's young son, who was about 3 or 4 at the time, saw John naked, and he made this inappropriate gesture towards him. Voncile was upset with Donald when he brought it up with his mother because John, he has a learning disability, and she explained to him that if he did do it, he did not mean any harm. But this was always something that divided Donald and his mother. Regardless, Donald's mother, she was always willing to help her son out, despite their disagreement. She gave him a lot of money over time, whether it was to fix his car, to pay his bill, to pay his DUI tickets. She even helped with the divorce fees and to move him to Florida. And Donald said himself that she would do anything for him. All he had to do was ask for money and she would help him out. Now, once he divorced his wife and moved closer to his mother, things seemed to improve. Tuesdays, as we mentioned, Donald would cook a dinner at Voncile's house, and he would bring along with him his dog and let his dog run around because the yard was fenced in. And he would also come over to watch football games. And then the big one. Police discovered that Donald was excluded from Voncile's will. She was noticeably in bad health around this time, and she had a lot of money in her accounts. The will stated that everything she owned would go to her 2 sons, Richard and John, and it specifically stated that her other son, Donald, is to be excluded from everything because she has helped him so much over the years financially. The Smith family had a significant amount of money vested, with approximately $300,000 in one of the accounts, and a large amount of money spread across pensions, 401ks, and other similar accounts. When everything added up, there was over $1 million, and Richard and John Smith were the beneficiaries.
Okay, so now things are starting to make sense. This is most likely money related.
Yes.
And honestly, that's a hard thing to swallow. I mean, your brothers are getting a large amount of money and you're just being left out completely.
Yeah, money can make you do evil things. So as the police are gathering more evidence, putting pieces of the puzzle together, the police chatted with the neighbors again. And you know, Ricky, every neighborhood has that one person who knows everything that's going on.
Oh yeah, we have one of them.
Yeah, it can be annoying sometimes, but in cases like this, it can also be useful. It's part of the charm of a close-knit neighborhood. The neighbor told the police something different from what Donald stated during his interview. He said that usually on Tuesdays, Donald goes to the house around 1 p.m. and he leaves around 5 p.m. before Richard gets home. He also usually brings his boxer along with him. However, on that particular night, the neighbor noticed that Donald didn't bring his boxer, and he was still there when Richard got home. His car remained in the driveway until about twilight. Being that the neighbor stated this, it contradicted what he told police that he left around 5 or 6 at night. And he also stated that he brought his dog with him. So that's interesting.
Yeah, some lies.
It's crazy how that neighbor picked up all those things, though, on that particular day. Isn't it, though? He's probably telling his wife, see? I solved case. So like we said, all of this is adding up. But in order to put the dressing on the salad, they needed the DNA test results to come in, which could ultimately provide enough evidence to arrest Donald. And if you didn't guess, Donald's DNA was found on these tested items.
So what was that again? That was like cigarette butts and things like that?
Yes. So his DNA was found on Richard's belt that Richard was wearing, and it was found on the inside of his belt, almost creating the idea that he tried to move him with his belt by holding on to the back of it. Also, Richard kept his financial information, such as his checkbook and his statements, in a zipped bag, which contained both Richard's blood and Donald's DNA.
Wow. Okay.
And yep, Ricky, you guessed it right, the cigarettes. So those cigarettes that were found in the trash that were on top of the bloodied towels, they contained Donald's DNA. And the hammer that was thought to be the murder weapon, it also had Donald's DNA, John's, Voncile's, and Richard's. And upon further testing, traces of blood were also found on the hammer.
At first, it probably wasn't too surprising that his DNA was in the house, right? I mean, he comes over every Tuesday, he hangs out there. The DNA is going to be there.
Yes.
But the fact that they found it inside Richard's belt, blood on the checkbook that was normally in his bag, those are the things that really made this stick out.
Yes, and this is what they needed to arrest him. So they arrested Donald, and he spent some time in jail awaiting trial. And during this time, he became pretty close friends with a guy named Marlon Purifoy. Marlon had written a letter to the prosecutors about 5 months after Donald's arrest to share some information that Donald had already told them. However, he also gave them some information that they needed. So this was approached with caution because it's quite common, many inmates do this in order to obtain something in return, specifically a lesser sentence, right? Marlon revealed information that they already knew. Voncile, she wasn't in good health. There was a will, and Donald discovered that he was not included in that will, and the remainder of the estate was left to John and Richard. He knew that there was a lot of money involved. But there was that one thing that the officers didn't know. Marlon stated that Donald told him that his mom had a safe in her closet with money. But the police actually never came across this safe during their searches. He also told them that Donald said that he had cut off part of his mother's pinky to force her to give the combination to the safe.
Oh, so that answers that.
And after he did that, she told Donald that it was in her black purse. Once the investigators looked into this, sure enough, there was a safe in the closet. And so they brought in the safe company to open it, and it was completely empty.
Do you think he got the money?
Whatever was in there, he got it. Now, family members, they often remarked that Donald appeared to be the black sheep of the family. He felt somewhat excluded after his mother had 2 children with another man.
Which could create some jealousy, I'm sure.
Yeah. Also, his brother Richard was working for Homeland Security. He was making decent money. And just as a side note, police never found Richard's wallet or keys to his car. Now, finally, when the trial approached, Donald was 68 years old, and the trial lasted for 4.5 years. The prosecution did a very well job presenting all that they had on him. It was quite convincing and very well pieced together, while the defense tried everything they could to counter the prosecution. They also had a Wiccan reverend testify before the jury, explaining that Wiccans do not practice human sacrifice. Marlon, the jailmate, was called to testify about what Donald told him in exchange for a 30-year sentence. He was actually facing life in prison for what he did.
What did he do?
So he had about 6 or 7 prior convictions for petty theft, such as drug possession, battery on law enforcement, aggravated assault, and aggravated battery. But he was in prison for attempted murder for beating his girlfriend with a claw hammer.
With a claw hammer? Wow, coincidence.
Yeah. And she sustained multiple lacerations. She was knocked unconscious. She required hospitalization, but she survived. Her 9-year-old daughter found her mom on the ground, unresponsive, and called the police.
Wow. So, okay, no wonder they're jail buddies. They have that in common.
Yeah. So the defense, they tried to counter that too, saying, look at this guy. He's a criminal. Many people in jail, they try to find stuff to get a lesser sentence. He's just, either making this up or found something on him. So he and some of the jurors even felt like that wasn't very reliable evidence.
Right. And I'm sure a lot of that information is stuff that he probably shouldn't have known unless Donald told him. Not to mention the pinky thing and the safe, like that all kind of lines up.
Yeah, it's pretty specific. And if you remember the D-Link cameras that Richard had put up because his mother had fallen, well, Donald actually took those down on that Tuesday night. But finally, after 4.5 years, the jury found 68-year-old Donald guilty of murder. Despite the fact that the jury ruled against the death penalty, he was sentenced to life in prison. It all makes sense when you think about it. The will, the money, and him moving to Florida to be closer to his mother. Maybe he was trying to secure a place in her will. Then there's Donald, who sold all of the family's belongings just a month after their murders. That action seems so spiteful and rageful. It's almost as if he murdered them, took possessions of everything that they had, and then he just decided to sell it all off.
I also don't think it helped that Richard made pretty good money working Homeland Security. And Donald, I think they said he was making like $10 an hour doing security for a hospital.
Yeah.
But she said that like Donald was better off, right? Like she had helped him financially in the past. So I think that was probably hard for him to swallow too. Like his brother makes more money, he's closer to the mom, and he's also getting these assets.
Why didn't he just talk to his mother and say, like, I don't have much money. Like, can I be in the will?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, why? I don't understand it. I think this is more like the icing on the cake to him. Like, if you look at the big picture, he was the black sheep of the family. He kind of was left out a lot. And then his 2 brothers, they live with Voncile. They're in the will. He's not. Like, I think there was like a lot of rage built in this attack because the hammer attack, Voncile was beat in the head 8 times. The medical examiner came up with, 8 times. That's 8 hits to the head.
Right. That's like crime of passion, right? Yeah. You could have shot someone one time in the head or something like that. It's like
he annihilated this family.
Yeah. So the whole Blue Moon murders, Wiccan murders, that's not even what happened here.
That was just an eye-catching headline for you to read what was going to happen.
Wow.
We should just name that the title of this episode.
Should.
No, but on a serious note, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. If you'd like, give us a 5-star review. We kind of need some more stars, so send us some love.
Also, check us out on Patreon. We have $1 ad-free listening. That's a pretty good deal. Check it out.
Yeah, no ads. You don't have to be interrupted with our silly ads. Sometimes they're a little too silly, but we have fun with them. That's what matters.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, thank you all so much for supporting us. And we'll see you next week.